Hey everybody, welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Presidential Pets: A Brief History by Sam O'Nella. Now this is an interesting one. I can't say I've thought too much about the topic of this video, though I know a few things here and there about presidential pets. For example, I'm sure we'll be talking about Theodore Roosevelt during this video. He had quite a collection of presidential pets, some pretty strange ones as well, so that'll be exciting to talk about. Now, before we get into this one, I'd appreciate it if you guys would leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this reaction. Presidential pets.
Hey adults. So most of us are aware of at least one animal companion to the commander-in-chief. All but 3 presidents have owned some kind of pet during their...
Oh, interesting. So we've got 3 presidents, according to this, who have not owned pets during their time in the White House. We've got Polk, Andrew Johnson, and Trump. Interesting group of fellas here.
term, and there's good reason for that. Not only does a lovable mutt serve to humanize an otherwise larger-than-life figure,
True.
but their cute antics can also be a great distraction when needed. Huh? Drone strikes? Never heard of her. Hey, we're doing a photo op with this dog that shares a name with my vice president's son, cause you know, that's not weird at all. But as it turns out, dogs and cats are just the tip of the iceberg. There have been a lot of quadrupedal occupants of the White House, even without Miss Lewinsky. So today, we'll be going through just a few of the more interesting ones. Going back to the beginning, Washington had critters galore, including 4 black and tan slur hounds that he named Drunkard, Taster, Tippler, and Tipsy.
Sorry, what? Those were their names? Drunkard, Taster, Tippler, and Tipsy. These have got to be the most alcoholic dogs of all time.
They sound like if Santa's reindeer were all alcoholics, which would be a shame because Rudolph's red nose would no longer be of note. John Adams had 3 dogs that presumably spanned the alignment chart, being named Juno, Mark, and Satan respectively. Not a joke. Jefferson
What? Why would you name your pet that?
kept around 40 sheep during his presidency, one of which was a 4-horned Shetland ram. Though nameless, said ram soon became famous for killing a young boy on White House grounds. Rather than immediately...
That's pretty bad. That's pretty bad. I will say I'm not too surprised at some of the variation here. You know, some of these guys, like Jefferson and Washington in particular, were of course plantation owners, right? Now, they didn't do a lot of farming by hand, their slaves did, but they oversaw a lot of operations on their plantation, so they often had some interest in livestock. So, you know, the sheep don't necessarily surprise me. The fact that this thing killed a child and looks like he's sending it back home to Monticello.
destroying the animal as we'd expect today, Jefferson just had it moved back to Monticello. It was eventually put down, but only after it single-handedly killed several other rams at the estate, which just goes to show how Jefferson operated. Random child, not the best optics, but that can be forgiven. But my own property, that's a bridge too far, Rambo. John Quincy Adams' wife Louisa practiced sericulture, which is a fun word for silkworm keeping. As a side note, sericulture has been going on since at least 3630 BC, which is kinda nutty, because that means we domesticated worms to turn their goo into clothes before we figured out how to ride a horse.
That's pretty weird. I mean, you know, silk has always been pretty precious. You know, back in medieval Europe, it was pretty important to get silk from the East, right? That trade would go through Constantinople, who did some silk manufacturing of their own. It was a very precious item, right? So we've had some sort of relationship with the silkworm.
Jackson had an African gray parrot named Poll, short for Polly, that would apparently curse like a sailor, probably thanks to the teachings of Old Hickory himself. Having outlived its owner, Poll ended up being removed from Jackson's funeral service after unleashing so much profanity that guests found it genuinely upsetting. He also kept roosters for cock...
Yeah, that seems like the kind of thing Jackson would do. This as well. Very in character, I have to say.
Fighting, which was acceptable at the time and still far from the worst thing he's done morally. During Van Buren's term, the Sultan of Oman sent a variety of gifts to the president, among them being a pair of tiger cubs. He was like, "This is badass," and desperately wanted to keep them in the White House. But the dickheads in Congress asserted that, due to a specific constitutional provision, gifts to the presidential office weren't for the man himself, but for the people. Van Buren said, "Fuck the
Come on, let him keep him in the White House.
People, them's my tigers," and got into a legal battle with the legislator over the issue, which he eventually lost. The tigers were subsequently sent to a zoo, and over 20 years
All I'm gonna say is that Andrew Jackson would have kept those damn tiger cubs. I'm not saying whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but, you know, Van Buren was essentially his successor. Andrew Jackson, he would not have given those cubs up.
Later, Van Buren died of pneumonia, completely unrelated to this incident. Although Andrew Johnson had no de jure pets, he did befriend a family of mice he found in his bedroom, feeding them flour and grain and referring to them as the little fellows. It's an oddly wholesome thing to hear from someone who essentially set the trajectory for the next 100 years of black disenfranchisement.
I was gonna say, this guy's a horrible piece of shit, but that's kind of a nice story about him. That's pretty endearing.
Mr. Johnson, we still have a country to rebuild. Get out of my room, I'm getting rat-pilled. Taft had 2 cows during his term. The first of them was named Mooly Wooly, and she died a year and a half in after, quote, eating too many oats.
Jeez.
Wooly was promptly replaced by
I'm not gonna make any comments about Taft in relation to eating too many oats. What I have noticed is that I wasn't so surprised at some of the earlier presidents keeping more farm animals, but it's seeming to me that up until relatively recently, we've had quite the selection of different types of animals, livestock, cattle, farm animals, whereas these days it's mostly dogs, maybe the odd cat. I'm trying to think. I feel like the last couple of presidents, mainly dogs that I can remember.
the far more dignified Pauline Wayne. She was a real dime of a heifer, which led Taft to show her off at the International Dairymen's Expo in Milwaukee.
Wow.
In order to get her there, she was transported in a private car attached to a train headed for the stockyards in Chicago. But a switch crew mixed up which car was hers, leading to 2 days of frantic telegraphs asking where the president's cow had gone. She only narrowly avoided the slaughterhouse when a couple of attendants at the stockyard recognized Pauline for what she was, and all was well. This next one requires a little background info. So the traditional Thanksgiving dinner was and remains a significant yearly ceremony for the first family. For half a century, from 1873 to 1913, the duty of providing the presidential turkey belonged to one Horace Woes, a private turkey farmer based in Rhode Island. After his death, though, things turned into
This guy had a monopoly on the service.
a free-for-all, with numerous farmers sending unsolicited turkeys, both alive and dead, in an attempt to secure a position as the next annual caterer for the White House. Nobody was decided on for a decade, and upon assuming office in 1923, Calvin Coolidge found the volume of birds showing up at his doorstep alarming, and put an end to the tradition that year, instead opting to buy his own turkey. But in
That sounds about right for Calvin Coolidge. Seems like he's the kind of guy that would be annoyed by having that many turkeys on the property. And he'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna go get my own.
1925, after much outside pressure, he caved and was immediately flooded with not only turkey, but a variety of increasingly exotic animals to eat. Among them was a live raccoon he received the following year. Coolidge was, at the time, blissfully unaware of the intricate dance performed on the palate between forward yet ephemeral gaminess and heady seductive musk when one submits himself to the experience of a toothsome raccoon fillet, and as such, he decided to keep it as a pet instead. Dubbed Rebecca, the creature soon came to be a core member
Look at that. There's Rebecca the raccoon. How about that?
of the Coolidge family. She ate as well as any of them, being fed things like shrimp and persimmons, and she was particularly fond of eggs. Given free reign over the house, Rebecca's hobbies reportedly included unscrewing light bulbs, uprooting houseplants, and playing with wet bars of soap in the bathtub. She was so beloved that she even had her own treehouse built for her in the White House yard. When the Coolidges made way for the Hoovers, Rebecca was forced to vacate her post, but the new first family soon found that they had a squatter on their hands. The new tenant of Rebecca's treehouse was a wild opossum who, rather than being evicted, was adopted by the Hoovers in a similar fashion to Rebecca, albeit from a farther distance, mostly just saying, yeah, that's ours now. He was given the name Billy Possum, which is a reference to our old friend Taft. See, as the man following Teddy Roosevelt in the White House, Taft had some big shoes to fill. So during his term, some enterprising young dumbasses approached Taft with what they claimed would be the sequel to the teddy bear. They called it Billy Possum, which is itself a reference to the president's fondness of possum and taters.
What the hell? I don't know any of this about Taft. Wow, they're like, okay, the teddy bear, it was such a hit. You're gonna get Billy Possum. I wonder if we are gonna talk about Teddy. Got a mention there. I wonder if we're gonna talk about his animals. We're getting close to the end. But anyway, possum and taters. Interesting.
Dish he famously requested at a banquet in Atlanta as an act of goodwill towards the South and its culture. Taft found the idea amusing enough that he gave the green light, and many thousands of Billy Possums were produced. Given their total obscurity today, it's clear these toys were a massive flop, and
they didn't really catch on in the same way that Teddy Bear did.
There's a few reasons for that. For one, trying to force fads at all is like trying to push water uphill, but also, the story of Roosevelt refusing to shoot a tied-up bear has a bit more symbolic poetry to it than it's a possum, because he liked possum.
Yeah.
fat boy, eat him up good. Couple that with the constant character assassination that the opossum as an animal has received from ignorant urbanites, and it becomes obvious that this thing was doomed from the start. But anyway, that's where the Hoover opossum got his name, and his exploits were pretty limited outside of temporarily filling in as a mascot of a local high school. In 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gifted a dog to the Kennedys, named Pushinka, or Fluffy. And while it is normally rude to look a gift dog in the mouth, an exception can be made when the single biggest threat to the free world insists that said dog should live with the president. Pushinka was x-rayed, put through metal detectors, and given ultrasounds out of—
They really put this dog through the works. Like, we need to make sure this is not some sort of Soviet spy operation.
fear that someone implanted—
I mean, to be fair, all they had to do was look at their own CIA and see what they were doing with, cats. And I could see why they were suspicious, because the Americans were thinking, this is exactly the kind of thing we would do. We turn a dog into a spy dog and give it to the Soviets.
her with a listening device. Fortunately, though there may be bugs in some of you mugs, there ain't no bugs in she, and Pushinka remained a Kennedy for the rest of her days. While truthfully, the gift was likely given as a simple act of good faith designed to reduce Cold War tensions.
Nice.
Pushinka was also the daughter of Strelka, who, during Sputnik 5, became the first mammal to make it back from space alive. So I'd like to think of it as more of a passive-aggressive space race flex. Like, yeah, our astronanimals are so alive, they're making babies even. Hope looking at this one constantly reminds you of where you stand. With that, I hope you found this highlight reel enlightening. It feels good to know that while Congress has always been a zoo, so too has the White House at times. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and you make my girlhood tremble.
What the hell? Okay, we didn't talk about Teddy. Okay, so on the note of a teddy bear, I'll show y'all something. Alright, here we go. I wanted to find a short article about Teddy Roosevelt and his pets. We've got one from the National Park Service, which, let's not even talk about the funding of the National Park Service right now. But Teddy Roosevelt began his presidency in 1901, along with 6 children and more animals than the White House had ever seen. Family of pets included a small bear named Jonathan Edwards. The bear is the most famous of the bunch. A lizard named Bill, guinea pigs, you can see all their names, a pig, a badger, a blue macaw, a hen, a one-legged rooster, hyena, barn owl, rabbit, and Algonquin the pony. How about that? President Roosevelt loved the pets as much as his children did. Algonquin was so beloved that when the president's son Archie was sick in bed, his brothers Kermit and Quentin brought the pony up to his room in the elevator. But Algonquin was so captivated by his own reflection in the elevated mirror that it was hard for him to get out. Quentin buying snakes. You can see here we've got the entire collection of Roosevelt family pets. Dogs, of course. They had many dogs with them, as presidents usually do. So I was kind of surprised Salmonella didn't talk about Teddy Roosevelt, because along with the usual dogs, we've got an entire zoo of animals that he kept at the White House. You can see a photograph of Algonquin the pony here, the beloved pony of the Roosevelt family. So anyway, I just wanted to bring up Teddy there. A nice little article from the National Park Service on him. There we go. Along with Roosevelt, we have a whole list of presidential pets. Some interesting ones. Like I said, I think recently it's mostly been dogs among our last couple of presidents, but we certainly saw some more variety in that video there, and some ones that I didn't necessarily expect. I gotta say, I liked the raccoon. That might have been a favorite of mine, Rebecca the raccoon. That was a good one. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed this one, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. With all that, hope you guys are having a great day today, and I'll see you all again next time. Goodbye.